Hi, welcome to Being Scared. My name is Dane. Before we start the stories, I want to say a couple things. I know I don't post that often anymore, and I'm going to try to get better at that. I just truly have a lot of other things going on. I'm a dad of 3. I'm married. I have a few other jobs that I'm constantly having to do, and other things that I'm trying to do as well. One of which I know that a lot of you know I'm trying to get into producing films and even directing as well, and writing. So just busy with that stuff, and my 10-year anniversary of being a YouTuber is coming up, so I'm going to plan something special. Hopefully a collaboration with some of my old friends I think would be really cool. So also I want to say, if you're a subscriber if you've been a subscriber for a long time, I want to say thank you. And if you're not subscribed yet, or you're a brand new listener and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe for me. The truth is my subscriber growth has gone down quite a bit in the last couple years, just because I've been having to do so many other things. And I honestly just want to be more direct with asking, because it's free. You can just hit that button and it really will help out my channel a lot. And so if you wouldn't mind doing that, it would really mean the world. Just subscribe, and then of course, if you like the video, if you enjoy it, then please hit the thumbs up as well. And with that being said, the last thing I want to say is, if you're looking for other places to listen to my stories, you can go on Spotify or anywhere that you listen to podcasts and type in Scary Stories and Rain. That's something that I'm also doing, and you can get the same kind of content on there. Same stories, same rain sounds. Also, last thing, we've been doing a lot of work on Chilling, which is the streaming platform that I created 5 years ago. And we are putting out a ton of content every week. Brand new award-winning audiobooks. Like we just put out The Lock by Steve Alten. One of the most awesome novels I've ever read. And if you're into the Loch Ness Monster lore, you know, it's a really good novel. But anyway, we're putting out new audio novels every week, new short films, new films, feature-length films, and just a ton of stuff every week is coming out. So please go to chillingapp.com, and if you really want to show your support there, I would really appreciate it. Just trying to make that, streaming platform as big as possible. And I think that's all. So with all of that being said, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. And I really, really hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope you enjoy these stories. And now, let's begin. I am 23 and I'm currently living alone. Sleep paralysis and night terrors are so common for me, to the point that I can recognize them instantly and break free from them on my own. But a few nights ago, I experienced something very different. A few nights ago, I woke in the middle of the night. I reached for my phone and saw that it was roughly 4 a.m. I am a light sleeper, so waking up randomly like this has always been an annoying, yet common occurrence. I sighed. My alarm would go off in 2 hours. I should try to fall back asleep, I thought. I kept telling myself to stop trying so hard. Let the sleep come to you. I even attempted meditation. But the more I did, the more I began to feel my brain inevitably waking up, uncontrollably racing through all the tasks that I needed to get done the next day. I accepted this fact and decided I should at least rest my eyes. I curled up on my side, on one half of my queen-sized bed, facing the edge of the bed. All of a sudden, clear as day, I felt my mattress sank behind me, like someone sat down on my bed. My eyes shot open. I froze, confused and terrified. I felt that sinking spot in the mattress shifted, and heard the sheets shuffled as the person was dragging themselves across my bed behind me. I lied very still and shut my eyes tight, trying to regulate my breathing and heartbeat. I told myself, as long as I can convince them I am really asleep, they would leave me alone. I felt the person moving closer and closer to me until they touched my back. I did everything to hold in a gasp. I didn't dare open my eyes because I feared what I would come face to face with. I could almost picture a haunting face leaning over mine, and I did not want to witness that. As if they've made sure I was really asleep, they retrieved. I let out a sigh of relief disguised as one of those grunts you make when you're sleeping. I could still feel them sitting on my bed behind me. I slowly opened my eyes, but I didn't move another muscle. Trying not to move my head and neck, I looked around the room with my very limited field of vision. It's not real, I thought. I was just dreaming. I was sure because I knew if it was an actual intruder, I wouldn't have reacted the way I did, and I wouldn't have tried to pretend to sleep. I would most likely put up a fight, try to escape or scream for help. But why is that spot on my bed behind me still sunken in? I looked at the room again. From what I could see, my room looked exactly like the way it should. You know how when you recall a dream that you had which took place in your room would always look a bit off in your dreams? Well, I was very sure that I was looking at my room with my own eyes, so it had to be real. It wasn't a dream. Then what was... All of a sudden, I felt a light tug on my duvet. I flinched, gasped, and closed my eyes. But it was too late. The person began pulling my duvet violently once they realized I was awake. I screamed and kicked and cried as I mustered up all the strength within myself to keep the duvet over myself. The entire time, I didn't dare turning around to see who it was or what it was. I just pulled, kicked and wailed in the same curled up position, keeping my eyes shut, snot and tears covering my face. For some reason, I believed if I let the thing pull my duvet away and expose myself, I'd be a goner. Then, as suddenly as it all occurred, it all stopped. I opened my eyes again and saw that the sky was brightening up. I sat up and looked at my bed and around my room. I was fully covered by my duvet. There was no sign of a tug-of-war ever taking place. There was no snot or tears on my face. I was sweating, and my heart was beating out of my chest. What was that? I was beyond baffled. Usually when I see my room in my dream, I'll remember how off it looked once I've woken up. But this time, nothing about the room I just saw seconds ago looked off to me. I was sure I was looking at my room with my own eyes, and the mattress sinking. It all felt so real. Perhaps my eyes were really open and looking at my room in reality, but my exhausted brain somehow slipped into that realm between dreamland and consciousness and created this juxtaposition of reality and imagination. But I am open to any other explanations. I made a best friend in high school named Ayla. Ayla and I were super close, and we are still friends today. I just wanted to introduce her, as she is an essential character in this story. She was 1 year behind me in high school, and when I graduated, I decided to take a gap year before I went to college so that I could help her finish out and be there for her. Her mother regularly left her all by herself in a big empty house, so I invited her to spend the night at my house almost every other weekend. This story is one of those times. It was a Friday night, and Ayla and I had made our usual plans that weekend for after she was finished with marching band that evening, around 9 p.m. She texted me to come to the school to pick her up, and when I arrived, she got in the car. I remember she looked rather sad, as opposed to her usually upbeat, silly self, so I asked what was wrong. Her mom had said she was not going to be home for another 3 weeks, after she had promised she was coming home the next weekend. Obviously, Ayla was very disappointed. I asked her what she would like to do, and Ayla said she would really like to see her mother's best friend, who lived about 4 streets away from my house. It was around 10 p.m. at this point, and I was a little bit hesitant to drop by unannounced, because she may not even be home. Ayla did not have her phone number, and I lived in the bad part of town. But Ayla was so insistent, so we drove to her house. This person was like an aunt to her. We arrived on our aunt's road about 10 minutes later, and there was no place to park, so I decided to park on some gravel at the side of the road on the corner so that I was not in the way of incoming traffic. The gravel section was around a block away from our aunt's house, so we had to walk to get there. We began the short walk, and I got this really uneasy feeling, like something was not right about the place. Even though we lived in a bad neighborhood, you could usually hear cars driving by, people shouting, and dogs barking, even that late at night. On this night, you could hear none of those things. The street was dark and quiet, save for a single light about 50 feet from the entrance to our aunt's home. The house is one of those places that is a single story, has no front porch so that the door is flat against the house, and has a long sidewalk to the entrance. I told Ayla I felt really uneasy, and she chalked it up to me being jumpy as usual. Can you blame me with the neighborhood I lived in? I decided not to push it, and she was already feeling down. When we got to the door, Ayla knocked a few times and rang the doorbell. She knocked and rang several times for about 10 minutes, and I said that her aunt probably wasn't home if she didn't answer after the first set of knocks. Ayla sighed and decided I was probably right, so we started walking to the car. As we turned around, Ayla and I noticed a short figure wandering into the orange glow of the single streetlight 50 feet away. He was what looked like to be a cross between a man and a child, about 4 feet tall, with a really muscular chest and arms, scrawny, but with scrawny pencil legs. He was very disproportionate. His head and features were obscured in a sort of blur, other than his clothing, and neither of us could make out exactly how old he was. Walking is not a very good way of describing how he moved. He sort of swayed with his shoulders in big, slow, jerky, and dramatic movements, letting his arms that were too long and muscular for his body flop beside him and pausing in between strides. He stopped beneath the light. We stood in shock for about 30 seconds, and it was not until I urged Ayla to hurry to the car that the short man started to run straight towards us. He was fast, and his swaying, jerky movements became swift, flinging arms that flung violently into the air as he ran, and Ayla and I screamed and took off as fast as we could go. I remember hearing the pounding of his feet behind us when I flung myself into the driver's seat, starting the ignition and locking all the doors. I was so scared I couldn't get myself to start driving away because my hands were shaking so badly, and Ayla shouted, "He's gone!" And he was, vanished without a trace. I glanced out the rearview mirror, and where before he had been 10 feet or less behind us, there was no longer a man. The street was quiet once again. That prompted me to move again, and I threw the car into drive and took off around the corner towards my house. We got there. We just sat for a few minutes and then went inside and tried to figure out what just happened. At that time, we decided it was probably an addict and tried to forget about it as best we could. But it was by far one of the scariest things that's ever happened to us. Growing up around the age of 13 or 14, my best friend's house was always where I stayed. Spent years practically living in her little trailer for the entire summer. I remember one winter, the year was rough, and we got around 6 inches of snow during winter break. Of course, I was determined to spend the time off of school at my friend's place, and it wasn't surprising when I ended up stuck there for a few days, due to the amount of ice and snow covering the roads. The cold weather made for a day of cozy hot chocolate, movies, crafting, and the most important thing, a wood-burning furnace. Me and my friend had just finished up making some crafts, and as such, night fell on the sky. So to set this story up, the trailer had around 7 rooms, a bathroom, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, and an extension they built into the back that served as the living room. The room faced the woods that stretched for miles, which I knew because we frequently found ourselves exploring it. The extension held a couch, the furnace, a TV and a stand, a chair, and 2 glass sliding doors that pulled out onto a small deck where her dad kept the logs and her cats sat delicately as they ate. Past the porch and out of view of the glass doors, by just a little bit, was her father's workshop, where he often spent his days and nights, only coming inside to add another log to the flame. Me and my friend spent a lot of time in the room because her bedroom was small and the couch in the extension could fold into a full-sized bed. We kept blankets inside the couch, so when it rolled out, we could instantly get in bed and go to sleep. That freezing winter night, we passed out under many covers across from the burning wood stove. I found myself hazily awakened by the cold of the door opening as her father walked into the room, illuminated by the light of the television, which my friend finds necessary to keep on to fall asleep. Not until he began walking across the floor did I realize that I was beginning to float. I could see my body laying on my side below me next to my friend. I knew that it was impossible to be awake because I could see myself asleep as I stopped at the ceiling above the television. I could smell the wood-burning smell and see the sparks as her dad lay a few logs on the fire. The small bits of snow boot prints melted on the carpet before he stopped to say goodnight to our sleeping figures, before sliding the door over to go back out into the shed for a night of work. I watched our still bodies lay and the fire crackle for what felt like an hour or so before my eyes shifted to movement. The sight of something slide into view of the glass doors from the side of the bed caught my gaze. The object could only be made out as a black mass, like a shadow. Despite the vivid colors of television light that danced across the glass, reflecting back, the figure was void of light. Somehow it looked like the spot sucked all the rays into the total darkness of a black hole that was only there in one spot and one shape. It was a few minutes of complete silence and dead staring at this mass before a shape began to appear. A hand, sliding into my line of sight and moving the handle to the sliding door. A slow, jerky movement turned the handle, and a creak sounded across the walls as the door slid along the frame and cracked far enough open for the darkness to slide through. The familiar cold climate greeted me as my body below my eyes shivered under the covers. The creature had to duck down and bend in order to fit into the glass door frame, which was well above the height of a person. Only as it moved past the reflecting glass did the mass begin to portray the figure of a man. The shape was similar to a human, still devoid of features, entirely black, and even the color in the room seemed to have been absorbed into the void of its body. The thing walked unsteadily, as if it was unable to control its body, like a man with slinkies as feet. With each step, its length seemed to stretch and bend, like it was unable to control the way it portioned out. It bended back and forth, closer and farther with each inch, closer it stomped. As the figure began to illuminate, what appeared to be the dark shadow of a hat upon its head rocked back and forth. The figure abruptly stopped and vibrated as it straightened and reached the edge of the bed, where I laid, closest to the doors. His body stayed straight, but only the middle section bent, so the top part of its frame was facing directly down, face to face with my closed, sleeping eyes. The dark hand jerkily pulled up and made a formed line above where the eyebrows would be, if the face of the creature wasn't a black hole, as if it was helping shield the TV light to look at my features better. And just like that, it stayed for another hour perhaps. I could see myself shaking below, and sweat reflected pools of light towards me. It was as if my subconscious knew that this mass inflicted pure terror and stillness and worry into my body, and yet I could do nothing but watch myself, cold and shaking below. I had no hands to shake myself awake, to pinch myself from this nightmare. All I could do was stare and watch as this thing stared, not so much as breathed or moved the bed frame in the slightest, just observing me silently in the night. When my brain tried to rack itself around all I could possibly think of as to how something like this could exist, how was this real? Then, just as insanely and unrealistically as it had appeared, All of a sudden, the creature straightened and hurriedly stumbled toward the door. The frame moved, opened and closed as he slid sideways out of view of the porch door. A slam echoed outside as the workshop door opened, hitting the wall. The familiar boot steps walked onto the porch, stepping in the ghosts of where the creature's feet had stepped. The sound of the boots marched to the door inside. My friend's dad, unbothered, peered into the reflecting glass before sliding to open the door, adding another log to the wood stove. He left the room after completing his task and headed toward his room to sleep for the rest of the night. I watched as this familiar scene calmed my sleeping face as the snow once again melted into boot prints on the floor, realizing that the thing had never left a mark in or on the carpet. I sat floating for hours as the daylight lit the room and the darkness faded before I slid back into my body below to wake. I sat up as my dream was vivid, and before I said a word to my friend, who was stirred by my abruptness, said that she had a terrible dream a few nights back, and she knew that I had seen it too. My friend spoke about a man who peered out of her closet and was gone when she went to check it out. I was baffled by this entire experience, but I have never had sleep paralysis like this before or after, and a mutual friend of ours had claimed to see the same man growing up in that house before we even mentioned our story while we were camping. I know it seems crazy, but I am convinced that the house, the extension, is built somewhere it shouldn't have been. The creature was not just a physical energy, it was full of dread and malice, and it was looming off of it as it stood near me. I just know that it did not want me to be there. It's been many years since I've been back to that house, and I don't talk to that friend as much anymore. I can only wonder if it ever came back. This was over a year or two ago. I'm young, living in Southern California, in the San Diego area, and live with my family, including my older sister. We'll call her Eliza. We had a cousin, who we'll call Jerry, visiting us from out of country. And as he and my sister are particularly close due to them being closer in age, she took it upon herself to be his tour guide, since he hadn't been to California since he was a small child. Eliza and Jerry are big fans of pop culture, particularly pop music. There was a fairly famous pop singer performing in Los Angeles, which is a bit of a ways away from where we live. Eliza was a particularly big fan, and she actually bought tickets specifically for Jerry and her so they could go during the visit. At first, I was a bit salty that I wasn't included in the invite, since I am somewhat of a fan too. But whatever. Not wanting to miss out on a fun day trip, I decided to invite two of my close friends, who we'll call Savannah and Eric, who were something of a couple at the time. I don't have my license, but both of them do, so that way once Jerry and Eliza go to the show, we could still drive around and do whatever. My sister drove the five of us to Los Angeles. She and Jerry in the front, with Savannah, Eric and me in the back. Despite being a casual fan of the artist they were going to see, Eliza and Jerry played the artist on repeat the entire time we drove. With traffic, it easily was a 3-hour trip. Mind you, the artist only had like 3 albums out at the time, and one of them was very loud and a bit depressing. My friends and I tend to like softer, more rock-type music, so you can assume we got tired of this pretty quickly. Not only that, but both Eliza and Jerry felt the need to screech the lyrics out the whole time, and unfortunately, neither of them had the most pleasant voice. Once we got in Los Angeles, around noon, we were all hungry and in need of a restroom. Being in Los Angeles, it's hard to find available, clean restrooms to use whenever. I suspect it's due to the constant use of the homeless, and thus many places aren't open to the public or available to use without purchasing something. So not only was the constant need to find restrooms a bit frustrating,
but finding food we could all agree on was also adding to the stress. Jerry had never tried ramen before, since traditional Japanese food isn't easily found where he lives, so we did our best to accommodate him. However, Eliza is staunchly gluten-free due to health problems, and Savannah has a severe peanut allergy, which caused us to have a little trouble finding somewhere we could all eat. These aspects aren't necessarily key to this story, but I want to build up the chain of events that led to my mood and later actions. Jerry and Eliza were totally in their own world, likely getting pumped for the show later that night. Eliza would ignore whatever my friends and I requested we do during our time there, and definitely played up the "I'm older than you and therefore what I say goes" card with me. So at this point, I was already getting pretty sick of being around her and Jerry, and couldn't wait to drop them off at the show to be rid of them for a while, so just my friends and I could hang out. Once we dropped the two of them off, the rest of the night was fun, just as it always is when the three of us hang out. We went to Santa Monica and watched the sunset, walked around a bit, and by the time we started getting hungry, we checked out Yelp and found a burger place that looked amazing and was well suited for our tight budget. I don't go to LA often, so when we pulled up the directions and got there, I wasn't aware of which part we exactly were in. We were looking to park, but a group of what seemed to be gang members stood in front of the spot we were going to park and started approaching the car and putting their hands on the exterior while looking into the window. Eric was driving and said something to the effect of, "You guys fine with parking here?" Not fine with parking there. Both Eliza and I told him we needed to pack it up and find somewhere else. I have always been extra cautious, especially in LA, since I've had a few other unsavory experiences, including the time a man followed me and my friend into our car, and we had to shove him out. So there was no way I felt good about parking there. So we drove a few blocks, starving and ready to just forget it, until we found a clear spot in a well-populated area. The food was great, and all was well, aside from the bunches of homeless people I saw around me. Pretty common in any part of LA you find yourself in. I didn't even realize that we had been in the heart of Skid Row. Once we made our way over, though, we discovered that the place we wanted to eat was in the midst of Skid Row. For those who don't know, Skid Row is a neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles that extends about 50 city blocks and is mostly home to the homeless. There are also a lot of dealers and ladies of the night that hang around there too. We were walking back to our car, and I looked up to one of the taller buildings along the block, and the sign at the side of the top of the building read, "Hotel Cecil, low weekly rates, 700 rooms." The Cecil Hotel could be a post in and of itself, but in short, it's an old hotel that briefly was in its prime back in the 20s and 30s. But as the Depression struck, the hotel and its ambiance went down with it. It had been known for housing some of society's unsavory, such as the homeless and those in the drug and sex industry, along with a few infamous guests, such as the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. It's supposed to be vacant as of now, but as far as I could see, I'm pretty sure there was ongoing activity within the building and around it. Squatters, I'm assuming. I don't believe in the paranormal or anything like that, but I can definitely confirm the unanimous thought that the place gives off really sketchy, creepy vibes. Once I realized that's where we were, my friends and I booked it to the car. On the other side of the street, we saw people looking into another parked car, and they looked our way once we approached the area. But thankfully, we took off in time. Thankfully, nothing happened to us there, but naturally, I was on edge a bit after that. We stopped to pick up some pie from a pie shop Eric was obsessed with, since it was on our way to the venue Eliza and Jerry were at. We thought we had plenty of time, but by the time we got to eating, Eliza called me and demanded we come over immediately. I knew nothing was wrong, so I did hurry a bit, but we decided to finish our pies before heading off. Eliza kept texting me with impatience, saying things like, "Waiting here is boring. and "Where are you? We're tired. We want to go now." Typical bossy older sister things. She was kind of a jerk to me the entire day, so I guess I used that to justify my jerkiness back. But then we had another bump in the road. The pie Savannah tried had peanuts cooked into the crust, and she got so sick. We rushed out of there and tried to stop somewhere for water and an antihistamine since she didn't have her EpiPen. She started feeling a bit better, but she was still really sick, and I was really stressed and worried. Once we got to the venue, Eliza and Jerry took forever to come out. I guess they started waiting to see if they could meet the artist as she came out. Once they finally came in and Eric and I shuffled to the back seat, Eliza had the nerve to yell at me for taking so long. We had to stop a few times so Savannah could throw up and rehydrate too. On top of that, Eliza and Jerry continued to play the same artist on repeat again, along with their choppy videos of the show. Oh, and of course they were singing. With Savannah sick, Eric as aloof as ever, and me stressing and on edge about everything that had happened thus far, I was ready to bang my head against the window. I know in the scheme of things, these aren't big deals, but by the time they all added up, especially my sick friend and the bad attitude of my sister, it drove me up the wall. We dropped Eric and Savannah off first, since their town was on the way before ours. It was around 1 a.m. At that point, I was sick and tired of the music and loud talking and cackling and just overall annoying conversations of my sister and cousin. I was that level of mad where you're quiet angry. So once the two left, I got out of the car and demanded that I drive home the rest of the way. Mostly so I could DJ, but also so I wouldn't have to hear them be jerks to me and talk so loudly. Eliza made a fuss about it, but ultimately, due to Jerry's cooperation, went to the back seat. Once again, I am up the wall, very on edge from this. I play my music as I drive us home, and everything seems fine. It's when I'm almost home that something happens. Our house is off the major freeway in town, though it's a bit of a lonely, desolate area. To get to our place, you have to pass a hilltop with other houses on it and make a turn around it to get to our neighborhood. There's a cemented patch of grass between a stretch of concrete between the hill and the turn that's used as a divider between oncoming and ongoing traffic. As I'm approaching, coming up to make the turn around the hill, on my left I see something that's creeped me out and been on my mind ever since. At this point it's like 1:45 or 2 o'clock a.m. This area isn't too busy this late at night, or this early in the morning, I guess you could say. On the grass divider and along the cement, there are people lined along the thinner cement part of the divider, and on the grass patch, a small crowd of people. There were at least 15 people, and they were all wearing white. I could see them perfectly with my lights on and the brightness of their clothes. And they were moving around, almost doing a jig when I came up. But as I was driving next to them, unable to take my eyes off of them, they started raising their voices and all talking at once. I could hear it through the window and over my music, and they started sprinting towards me, trying to get my attention and following along as I pulled to the right to make my turn. They literally were following me and talking at us. It was the most bizarre, creepy thing. I can't say for sure, but they were dressed similarly to KKK members, though I'm not too sure if that's what they were. And I'm obviously having a WTF moment. I didn't have a clue about what I saw, but I knew I did see something. I scream and panic and ask Eliza and Jerry if they saw, and of course, they had been dozing off and groggily said no. But I know I saw, whatever they were. Some of their faces weren't covered, and I know I saw a man with a mustache, one of the many people, and they were rushing over, and I got the feeling they wanted me to stop the car or something. I know people sometimes create diversions or distractions like that for their own nefarious reasons, to target drivers. so I'm not sure what that was or what they were doing. The town I live in is small, old, and somewhat rural. We are known as one of the most conservative towns in the USA, so I guess it could have been something like the KKK, due to the way they were dressed. There are also some known observers of the occult in the area too, though not so common these days. Eliza and Jerry got irritated with me because I drove around the block past our own a few times, rather than immediately pulling into our street. I was pretty sure they weren't following anymore, but I just was so creeped out, I felt like I had to do something, just to be safe. I told our mother about this. She believed me, I think, to an extent. But I mean, it does sound really absurd, and my sister to this day claims that it never happened. She even refuses to believe or acknowledge that I was the one driving. Sometimes it makes me feel crazy, but I know at the very least, I was the one driving. She says she was, but I 100% know it was me. I am 100% positive I did see something, some mysterious group doing who knows what. Be careful, guys. When you go out of town, especially to a place like Los Angeles, you can expect some weird encounters. But the strangest, and possibly the most dangerous one, was just a little over a block away from my house, just lurking in the dark, waiting for some passing motorist to stop and talk to them. Or maybe something far more sinister than just talking. The events of this story took place around the autumn months of 2014. I am not sure what would have happened if my mom hadn't heard this person, but either way, I am grateful she did. To help paint a better picture of the events I'm about to describe to you, I must briefly explain the basic layout of my home. There are 3 entrances to my home: the front, side, and the back door, which was located in what was my bedroom at the time. The back door has a glass window that allows the perfect view of our quarter-acre backyard from my room. This might not seem like much, but living in Salem, Oregon, that's as good as you're gonna get. To access the backyard, you must first walk down the driveway on the left side of the house, leaving you visible to our next-door neighbors. This is also where our brittle side door from the 1940s lies. At the end of the driveway is our garage, and to the right of that, our backyard, as unfortunately there was no gate at the time. But this incident and several others like it led to us putting up a roughly 7-foot fence. So now that you know the basic layout of my home, you're probably noticing the potential for something sinister to happen. And happen it did, my friends. But one thing is for certain, it could have gone a lot worse. This particular incident took place in the early morning hours of 2 and 3 a.m., as I've always been a hardcore insomniac. I was watching YouTube on my tablet, as most 13-year-olds do, when I'm startled by a beam of light illuminating the garage doors in my periphery. Before I even turned my head to look, I had already come to the following conclusions. 1. The familiar circular beam of light was that of a flashlight. And 2. I had a weapon under my bed that I use for target practice just in case. I decided to wait and see who this light was illuminating from, as it wasn't uncommon for our neighbor to come into our yard looking for his cat. It's a good thing I did, too, because the flashlight was attached to the end of a weapon, held by a uniformed police officer, complete with a ballistic vest, taser, baton, and radio. Confused, I leave my bedroom, expecting to see my mom sitting on the couch, watching her favorite TV show, Bones. Instead, I saw my mother on the tips of her toes, leaning over the kitchen sink, looking out the window, and peering, trying to get a view of the officer, slowly and methodically creeping his way up the driveway and into our garage. Yep, he was definitely here for us, I thought, as I began to ask my mom what was going on. Apparently, less than 15 feet away from my bed, a homeless person, on who knows what, had snuck into our backyard, and accidentally kicked our glass recycle bin, alerting my mom, who was in the basement doing laundry. My mom tells me she then looked out the basement bathroom window, where she saw the person making the kind of stance that one would, trying to balance on a board, almost like the stance of a child would do when they are out of bed at late hours of the night, trying to be sneaky to fetch a snack. Regardless of their feeble attempts at being stealthy, my mom had seen them, and they must have caught on too, because by the time my mom went upstairs to retrieve her phone, dial 911, and an officer arrived, they were gone. The cop told us that no one was in the garage or the backyard, and I could almost feel the anxiety lift off my mother's shoulders. Even more so when the officer offered to send someone over and survey the house until sunrise. So just to clarify, yeah, someone who wasn't supposed to be here was here. And not only that, but if they had gone 1 or 2 more steps forward, there's no doubt they would have seen me, and I would have been none the wiser. You may be glad to hear that I am much more cautious nowadays. I have since updated my arsenal. We have also installed several security cameras, a fence in the backyard, and a motion detector light. I work at a small organic grocery store with a surprising amount of strange customers. We get a lot of conspiracy theorists who, for some reason, always want to talk to me. Those people are weird and sometimes get slightly aggressive and uppity when I don't respond to their monologues they had prepared for me, but they don't scare me. I am lucky to work at a place with a wonderful group of managers who have no problem taking over a situation if it gets out of hand. The guy who scares me the most rarely ever actually talks to me. He's a regular there, one of the many of the homeless population who will stop in every now and then. Most of them are lovely people, if a little strange. This man works at a store nearby and lives in his car, so he'll often stop in multiple times a day. He has said a multitude of crazy things to my coworkers, unprompted and for ridiculously long amounts of time. He told one of my coworkers that because he wasn't white, he was the son of the Antichrist, and I heard him growl at my coworker once because he had to swipe his card again. Even customers have complained about him saying weird things to them. The worst thing he does is he'll just stand and stare at us, specifically the employees. Sometimes he'll just stand in front of the checkout lines, not holding anything, not wanting to check out. He just stands still and stares at us. It's starting to ramp up, and I am genuinely afraid of him. The staring and the weird comments were bad enough, but this is the incident that made me fearful of him. I had gotten work done early, so I was doing some grocery shopping around 8 p.m., an hour before closing. There were very few people in the store, and of course, our scary friend, we have lots of names for him, but I mostly call him Squinty. He's always staring with his eyes really narrowed, was wandering around again, slowly as he usually does. I swear to you, every time I looked behind me, he was following me into that aisle. Even if it was starting to hurt and I got the few things I needed, even if it was one he had just been in, he was waltzing right up behind me. My stomach was starting to hurt, and I got the few things I needed and left as fast as I could. Later on, I was convinced by a wonderfully kind manager to let him send in a report so they could look at the tapes. Ever since then, his behavior has gotten scarier. One night, he came in exactly at 8:45. He has been coming in nearly every day for years. He knows what time we close. He also knows that I almost always close in the evenings, and I usually work several days in a row. It was right as I was about to go count my till, and I swear as soon as I turned around, he was standing at the entrance, hands in his pockets, totally still, staring me down. My manager walked me to the office, and he did not move until I was in that room. I had the store manager walk me to my car. He isn't the most sensitive person. He wants to see the best in everyone, oftentimes against the wishes of his employees. But even he was telling me He never comes in this late. As I was putting things into my car, he said, "Oh, that's weird." I look up and sure enough, there he is, standing by his car and staring in my direction. Once I see him, he slowly gets in his car and just sits in it, not moving. He didn't follow me out of the parking lot, but I still took turns and back roads to make sure he didn't follow me. I was feeling pretty good this week. He didn't come in very much, and when he did, my manager would see him and tell him to go sit in the cash office before he could even lay eyes on me, then come get me when he left. I felt safe and thankful for these wonderful people. Then, the other night, close to closing, I turn around to get some bags ready, and he is standing outside the window, right in front of me, staring at me, hands in his pockets, mask on his face so I can't see his expression, just his squinting, glaring eyes. I was shocked, and of course, at that moment, I had a rush of customers and no other workers around me to help. My manager was on break. The store manager was somewhere way in the back. I was the closing cashier, and I was all alone, except for the few very disinterested late-night customers that were now impatiently standing in my line. I kept going as he walked into the store. He disappeared for a moment, as is the layout of the store, and later my coworker in another department, also a young female working alone, came up front to tell me he was slowly walking through those aisles, not looking for anything, not looking at anything but her. Finally, my manager came back. I quickly told her I needed to go to the back, and as I did, the man comes moseying up to the front to stand in front of my register, once again staring at me. I turn off my light, and she turns hers on, and I work to finish the transaction I was on. He has nothing in his hands. He's not trying to check out, but he's standing there like he's waiting in line. I put my closed sign up. He doesn't move. As soon as I finish, I all but run back to the cash office. He was there for another 20 to 30 minutes before leaving. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but every time he enters the store, my stomach drops. He's barely ever spoken to me, but I can't help but feel like he knows I reported him and knows that I'm afraid of him. Recently, in one of his long-winded one-side conversations with a different cashier, he said he often runs out of his medication at the end of the month. As I'm writing this, it's the middle of February. If this is how he's acting on his meds, I'm afraid of what the end of the month will bring. I have an aunt that lives in a haunted house. The house was built in the late 1800s. The house has a weird setup. It is technically two separate identical houses conjoined as one big house. According to my mom, the house was owned by two women that were twins, with each twin living on their own side, and each side connecting through a staircase in the attic. Legend has it, the twins had an uncle that did bad things to them, that ended in one of the twins getting pregnant and having a baby. The other twin smothered the baby, ending in both of the twins taking their lives. Weirdly, almost every family member that has had the misfortune of sleeping over at that house has left with a story to tell. To my dismay, I have on two different occasions. The summer after I graduated 8th grade, my older cousin was getting married out of state. Not all the family from our state could go, so just me and my aunt went. We had a very early flight to catch, so she figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house. I asked if I could sleep in her room. When she asked why, I was direct and told her because the house was haunted. As usual, she shrugged it off and angrily disputed that there were no ghosts. She said, "If it'll make you feel better, you can stay in my room." As night drew near, I went to the bathroom to the medicine cabinet and took sleep medicine in hopes that it would make me fall asleep before my aunt. Sure enough, it didn't. My aunt dozed off, and I lay wide awake and scared, occasionally switching my eyes from looking at the TV to glance at the hallway through the open door. A couple of hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to let my guard down and relax a little. I got a little more comfortable in the bed, and out of nowhere, the closet doorknob started frantically rotating, as if someone was trying to get out. I immediately sat up, wide awake and in panic mode. The remaining hours of the night I stayed awake, in fear, watching the closet door, not sure who or what was trying to open the closet. But to this day, I am happy nothing ever did. Years later, the summer after I graduated college, I spent the night over at her house again. Like the previous time, we were traveling out of town the next day, and my aunt figured it would be better if I spent the night at her house so we could catch our early flight the next morning. I unhappily obliged. As we retired for the night, I headed to the room where I would be sleeping, quote unquote. It was the room down the hall from my aunt's. I closed the door, put on my pajamas, and sat down on the recliner in front of the TV. I had already mentally prepared myself and had expected to stay awake the entire night. The beginning of the night, I browsed the web on my phone to pass time. A couple of hours passed, and nothing happened. As soon as the clock approached 3 a.m., I began to hear what sounded like heeled shoes walking. Whatever it was, walked up the stairs, down the hall, and stopped right outside the room I was in. I immediately jumped up, went to the heavy daybed in the room, and pushed it in front of the door to prevent whatever it was from opening the door. The walking continued, again and again. It would start from the base of the stairs, go up the stairs and down the hall, each time stopping right outside the door of the room I was in. Despite barricading the door closed, I was still scared. To lighten up the tense atmosphere, I turned on a channel that had stand-up comedy and tried to watch that. But I was still scared. The walking persisted for the entire hour. Eventually it stopped, but I kept the door barricaded, remained awake, and waited until morning to open the door. Needless to say, I have not been back to sleep over at my aunt's house, and never will again.
Okay, so here in the UK, we don't really have elementary schools, but the equivalents are called junior or primary schools. We go here from about 4 to 11 years old, so while I suppose they're not strictly American elementary schools, I suppose this story fits into the age bracket. Anyway, this is the scariest thing that happened to me while I was at junior school. The school I went to had a tiny playground. I think there were only about 100 kids in the entire school, so the little concrete play area was maybe only 50 meters across. It was tiny, so if something happened on the playground, every kid and supervising teacher could see it, which I suppose suited them down to the ground. But it didn't suit me the day something happened to Lewis, because one day, we were all just legging it around the playground as little kids do, not a care in the world, when I hear one of the teaching assistants scream really, really loudly, "Lewis! Lewis!" I remember it was autumn, because I was playing with some fallen leaves when I heard the scream. Don't ask me why. I spin around like every single other kid in the playground after hearing that blood-curdling screech to see the teaching assistant kneeling down by Lewis, who was just lying on the concrete, with blood pouring out of his mouth. Not a little drip. I mean a steady stream of blood that was just cascading out of the corner of his mouth and pooling on the ground beneath him. I mean, that was horrific enough, but the thing that really got to me was that he was totally unconscious and that his eyes had just rolled up into their sockets, so you could only see the whites of his eyes while he bled uncontrollably from his mouth. Loads of us just piled into the coat room. Some kids were crying, others were pale and in shock, and I obviously can't speak for any of the other kids, but I 100% thought that Lewis was dead. I had never seen any kind of injury like that before. At least when my friend Ewan broke his leg when he fell off a swing set, he'd screamed bloody murder until the ambulance came. I knew he was alive, even if it was really distressing. But Lewis was out cold, bleeding like a stuck pig. And his eyes. I didn't know eyes could even do that back when I was that age. Afternoon classes basically got canceled. The kids were just distraught, so no one was in any fit state to be concentrating on lessons. We were just kept in our classrooms until we were all called into the main assembly hall to hear the news about Lewis. We didn't get all the gory details, only that Lewis had taken a fall in the playground and had banged his head. We were told that he had been taken to the hospital and that he was okay, but that he would be out of school for a week or so while he healed up. Lewis was back before we knew it. We were all super relieved to see him. I remember the first day he was back, we all gathered around him as he showed off the big scar inside his lip, where he had fallen on his face. He had also lost a few baby teeth, which I guess was lucky, as he was about to lose them anyway, I suppose. That was definitely the most terrifying thing I ever saw during my childhood. I mean, I'm 32 now. It's been like 25 years or so since it happened, but I remember the whole thing as clear as day. It's just burned into my memory. Those eyes. The whites of his eyes. They're something I'll never, ever forget. To start this story, I should mention my occupation. I am in my 30s now, and I am a journeyman electrician. I often work alone and in people's homes, so needless to say, I often find myself in rather interesting situations. I am a rather small woman, as I am only 5'2" and maybe 125 pounds. I am very aware of my limitations when it comes to physically dangerous situations, especially when it would apply as a target of just about any male. I served in the military, so I have a rudimentary knowledge of hand-to-hand combat, and I am adept, trained, and a concealed weapons permit carrier. I also had experience as a paramedic in a major city. Needless to say, I feel as prepared as someone my size and gender could possibly be for most situations. However, this situation triggered a visceral response, so I thought I would share my experience with who I refer to as the man with the mannequin legs. In the interest of privacy and simplicity, I will refer to him simply as John Doe. It starts on a Friday, almost 2 years ago. The time was 7:30 p.m. I had already worked an extremely long day and was just ready to get home. I received an emergency dispatch to an apartment complex several towns over. I grumbled as it was a Friday night. I just wanted to go home and shower. The dispatch was for a loss of power to a condo unit in one of the older lower-income buildings. There are certain home and buildings I go into which automatically trigger a certain amount of caution. Upon seeing the building, I had a gut feeling already that I would proceed with an air of caution. I don't know what it was, but for the first time in 7 years of doing this job, I had an extreme sense of anxiety and trepidation about walking into the property, thinking that I was over-exaggerating, but wanted to trust my gut feeling and be safe. I immediately texted both my office manager, my boyfriend, and my mother my GPS location with a message saying, "This is where I am. His name is John Doe. This is his address and unit number. If you don't hear from me every 20 minutes until I tell you I have left, please call me first. If I don't answer, please call the police." My company uses a dispatch software that tells them my location for every appointment, but my gut told me that I needed to make sure they knew where I was, that they needed to hear my gut feeling screaming as loudly as I could. When I rang the bell, a gruff voice of a man who smokes far too many cigarettes forcefully inquires as to who is there. I answer, stating that I'm the electrician who was dispatched. He hits the buzzer and lets me in. I walk up the stairs, and the first thing to hit me is the smell of the building. A building full of unwashed bodies, unemptied wet ashtrays, and stale alcohol. He opened his door and the smell intensified. He wore grubby, unkempt, ill-fitting clothing, stained with fluids, bodily or food in origin. His face, thin and gaunt, unshaven with dark, heavy bags under his eyes. Entering the door, I noticed a small table that was stacked with empty beer cans toting the champagne of beers. A plastic whiskey bottle went thunk off the toe of my steel-toe boots and skidded across the floor. I look up at him. Though on the skinny side, he was tall. I ask him for details regarding the loss of power, and he explains that some things work, while others don't. I won't bore you with the details, but in the end, I had to see the panel. I told him I had to go run out to my truck to grab a different screwdriver, and I went back out and got my concealed weapon, shoving it in my pants. I went back into the home with a deep breath to settle my nerves. He leads me to his bedroom as I pick my way across a sea of discarded items. We pass the kitchen, the sink stacked high with plates, unwashed with rotting food precariously balanced atop one enough, like a perverse game of Jenga. Stepping over clothing, garbage, and discarded alcohol containers. Burn marks in the carpet from someone nodding out and dropping a lit cigarette. I enter his bedroom. A mattress with a tattered blanket and no sheets or pillows sits in the center. If you ask any person who regularly goes into the home of others, one of the signs that something is off with the resident is a bare mattress. I'll be honest with you, no person in their right mind sleeps without at least a fitted sheet on their bed. The furniture is all second-hand and distressed, broken in places, water-stained as if it were saved from some unknown curb, which was not sold during the estate sale. The top half of a naked, dirty mannequin, appearing as if it were stolen from an abandoned storefront of a long-dead store, lays in the bed. I trip over something as I'm making my way around the bed. Looking down, I see two things that make me take pause. The more alarming of the two happen to be a set of legs from a mannequin, carelessly hacked from the top half with what looks like to be a very dull hacksaw. A hole crudely drilled between the legs, lines drawn at the natural human joints, like a surgeon marking amputation lines on body. Its hard-molded plastic, white in color, posed on the floor like it was modeling the latest fashionable footwear. While trying not to trip, I see a dimly flashing red light coming from the ankle of my creepy host. It's a Department of Corrections GPS ankle monitor. My breath catches in my chest as my anxiety increases. He leads me to the panel, which of course had to be located in the bedroom closet. I think to myself, of course, why wouldn't it be in the bedroom closet? I have to turn my back on him to make the repairs, which makes my hair stand on end. He watches me, smoking a cigarette and sneaking to the living room often to take a swig from a brown paper bag, occasionally standing over me to view my progress. He stands behind me, his hot breath on the back of my neck. Keep in mind, I am now in a closet, working in the back corner on an electrical panel, keeping my body turned as much as possible while still being able to complete my task. Which unfortunately wasn't enough, as I didn't see him come out of the bathroom on the side obscured from my view. The apartment had one of those bathrooms with a door to the hallway and a door to the master bedroom.
"What's the problem?"
He rasps suddenly, making me jump. "Well, sir, your electrical panel is failing. It appears that only half of the panel is working. That is pretty common for this model at the end of its life." I reply, keeping my tone even and unwavering. I leave, telling him that I need a different type of breaker in order to get him up and running temporarily. I was not about to spend the several hours required in his presence to replace the electrical panel. But without getting too far into it, I could shuffle the breakers around in order to return power to about 80% of the circuits in the panel. But he had a very old panel, and I had to go get some supplies to do it. I leave and head over to the supply store. all the while texting those who received my earlier texts regarding my apprehension of going into the home. I tell them that my gut feeling was perfectly correct, and I did not feel comfortable. My office manager told me that she would understand if I was not comfortable finishing the repairs, but I told her that I wouldn't dump that on another one of my coworkers. Although they were male, I realized that I had more of an ability to protect myself than they would have, although it didn't cross my mind till later that they would have been less of a target. I would go back in and finish my job. I returned, still with my concealed weapon, taking comfort in its presence, but being extremely aware that if he came up behind me and smashed me on my head, I may not have time to react, taking solace in the idea that I would be safe, at least until I had restored electricity to the home. Why attack the electrician until the job is done, right? I make a few temporary repairs and tell him that I'll have to come back to finish the rest of it, stressing that this repair would probably only hold him over until the following week, or until the panel has failed in its entirety. The panel needs to be replaced, and I would send him an estimate to replace it. Realizing that this would be the most dangerous part of my interaction with him, I ready myself to get payment and leave. If there was a time for him to decide to act on more nefarious predilections, this was the time. I had already prepared the invoice. I think he notices me gripping my folding knife, my hand inside my pocket, ready with a backup in case I cannot get to my concealed weapon in time. As he had not done anything overtly threatening, I give him the benefit of the doubt, and he doesn't do anything threatening. His hands shake, and he fills out a check for the amount due. His hand shaking while holding the pencil, the kind of shakes you see in somebody who is an alcoholic or a drug addict. Again, not overtly threatening. He thanks me, all while eyeing me like a piece of meat. He watches me walk to my truck, following me to the apartment landing and to the main front door. I am almost running now, and I jump into my work truck and lock the doors. I finally breathe. I finally feel safe. Until I see him in my mirror, staring back at me from the rear section of my truck. Not threatening, just staring. I leave without finishing my paperwork and go a few blocks down. I stop and start shaking as the adrenaline slowly leaves my system. I reassure my family that I'm safe and tell my boss that I cannot go back to that address. Within 10 minutes of leaving, the office manager contacts me and tells me that he has already booked an appointment for me to do the panel the following week. I tell her that I have not even sent him an estimate yet, and if he can't afford it, to be prepared for a cancellation. That following Monday, I prepare the estimate, and with the permission of my boss, I overprice it about 3 times what it should cost, hoping that he will not ask me to come back. No such luck. Within 10 minutes of sending the estimate, my boss called saying that he had accepted it and wishes to keep his appointment. I told my boss I cannot go back to a guy who accepts an estimate that costs 3 times over what it should, especially when he obviously didn't have funds to spare. I beg and plead not to make me go back. Instead, they offer to send me back with another person, and my heart drops. I look for a reason not to. After seeing the ankle bracelet, I knew he would have some form of criminal record. I quickly Google his name and the name of the city he lived in. It was one of the first results, and I find out exactly why he was wearing an ankle monitor. He had just gotten out of prison. John Doe served 2 years in state prison for stalking a woman. A perfect stranger, a waitress he met at a local breakfast joint. When she threatened to report him, he broke into her home. He held her hostage as she begged him to allow her to leave. When she refused, he told her he would kill her and threatened to dismember her. He threatened to make her disappear in a way that her family would never know where she went. The article didn't say how it concluded, but the woman was safely able to get away, and he was arrested. He then spent 2 years in a state penitentiary and received 5 years of monitored probation. He had only been released in the last year. It took less than a year for that apartment to get in that state. My heart leapt into my chest as I realized what this man may have truly been capable of. Here I was, a small woman, in the service industry just like that waitress. Him setting up the appointment, overpriced. It was all so wrong. With the evidence of the mannequin staring me in the face, it appears his fantasy is alive and well. It appears that the last 2 years have taught him exactly what he wanted to do. I thought back over the last week and remember 2 occasions where a beat-up old tan Buick had been following me, but not closely, not even enough to set off alarm bells. But again, I noticed these type of things. I can't be 100% sure it was him, but looking back, it probably was. It just seemed like the car would spontaneously appear and follow me between appointments, never entering the neighborhood I was going into, but would follow me onto the main streets. Keep in mind, my work van is essentially a 9-foot-tall billboard for my company. I am impossible to miss, so you do not have to be very close to see where my truck is going. I do not have a rear view mirror, so if you're in the right spot, I cannot see a good majority of a car that's behind me. I can tell there is in fact a car behind me, but I obviously cannot see the front portion of it. The car would always be around for a few of my morning appointments, but once I would travel more than about 15 miles away from the town that John Doe lived in, it would vanish. When I'm doing estimates all day, I can easily drive about 200 miles in one workday. I can drive between job sites that are maybe 10 minutes apart, or up to about an hour and a half from each other. I crisscross the northeastern half of the state all day. It makes it extremely difficult for somebody to follow me all day long. I assume he tried to find me by name, but without telling you my name, I can tell you that I have an incredibly common name, to the point where when I was in middle school, there was another girl attending the school with the same exact name, first and last. My name is so incredibly common that unless you knew me personally, you could not find me on the internet. I keep all of my security settings on social media incredibly strict, and I never post anything that will reveal my location. I even have this setting off in my phone that saves the location to a photo. I wouldn't say that I'm paranoid per se, but I learned very young what the world is actually like. That most people do not have your best interest in mind. I can thank the US Army for teaching me, but once something goes into the internet, it can never be truly deleted. I think this is why he was never able to find me, although I am sure he tried. He called my company almost daily for weeks to try to get me to go back out to work on his electrical panel. He even offered to pay me more money if I would come back. Luckily, I had shared all the information I had found with all of the office staff. I made sure a do not service was placed on his name and address. My company stood behind me and protected me, going as far as to make sure my name and photo were not on the website, that I was never tagged in any social media, and that my schedule was randomized with me never starting and finishing at the same town or anywhere near the same location. I was never booked within 10 miles of his address. Needless to say, my company never sent any technician back to the man with mannequin legs. I ended up with nothing more than a story that shows no matter how prepared you might be for a situation, you never know exactly who you're dealing with, that you should be prepared for anything and everything that can come your way. A story that stresses the importance of trusting your instincts. Just for context, I am a 23-year-old male who lives in the Midwest, surrounded by woods and open farmland. I often have sleep paralysis, and I don't have creepy or off-putting experiences. Sometimes I will hear something or see something that I think could be just my brain still half asleep. Not too scary. For anyone who hasn't had sleep paralysis before, it's mostly just being awake and not being able to move. And yes, that sounds scary, but to a person that it happens to almost on a weekly basis, you get kind of used to it. Most of the time, I just realize I'm in that state of being awake and not being able to move. So I usually just casually try to move my leg and arm muscles to eventually wake up and reposition myself so I can try to go back to sleep. Usually, changing positions helps. There were 2 occasions that I would like to share that genuinely terrified me. The first incident was the very first time I had sleep paralysis. I was about 8 years old, and I was living with my grandparents at the time in the middle of a 26-acre plot on the countryside. I had a television set that was from the 80s or 90s. Basically, one of those types of TVs that gave you that weird static feeling if you got too close. Anyway, I was sleeping one night, and I heard the sound of metal scraping, and I woke up. The TV had a white static that was illuminating my room. In the room, there was a closet that had a broken sliding door that would only open with extreme force. Enough force that I, as an 8-year-old child, couldn't even open. Well, the scraping metal sound was the door sliding open, and I knew it was that sound because I had heard it all the time when my grandparents needed to get into that closet. When I realized what it was, I thought it was one of my grandparents, though I thought it was strange that they were trying to get into the closet, since it was around 2 or 3 a.m. at the time, and there isn't really anything they should need in there at that time of night. It was mostly just old clothes and random knickknacks they have collected. When I went to turn my head to see what it was, I couldn't move my head. So I tried to pull my blanket off my body to try and stand up, and I couldn't. The only feeling I had was what I could best describe as that feeling when your arm or leg falls asleep and you get that pins and needles feeling. Yeah, that, but across my entire body. I was genuinely terrified of why I couldn't move and why I heard the closet opening. Eventually, I turned my eyes enough to see out of my peripheral vision a figure standing halfway out of the closet, staring at me. Not moving, just standing, staring. It was watching me struggle to move, and I couldn't do anything but stare back. I will never forget the long, gangly look of the figure. If I had to compare it to something, I would say it reminds me of The Rake. But obviously, this was a time before internet scary stories and creepypastas, so I didn't know what that was at the time. All I know is I was in a complete state of shock and horror, and I tried to let out a scream to alert my grandparents, but I couldn't even muster up a squeak. Eventually, with enough brute force and a will to live, I managed to regain all my senses and shot up out of my bed and ran to turn on the light. The figure was gone, but the closet was still open. I remember running to my grandparents' room and screaming that there was a man in my closet, and my grandpa, who was a hunter, had many weapons in the house, and grabbed one. He threatened anyone who was in the house that they better show themselves. No one was there. I told them about the closet, but they just told me it must have been open already. I know it wasn't open, because that closet already scared me, and I made sure it was closed before I went to bed. I never slept in that room again. I had my brother switch me rooms. I made up an excuse that I didn't like the color of the room, and he just went along with it. But I think he knew I was scared, and he was older, so he took the room just to be a good brother. I never told him of the experience I had with the figure, because I didn't even know if it was real or not. The second experience was more recent, and the only other time that I have had a truly terrifying experience with sleep paralysis. I am now married, and I told my wife about my sleep paralysis, but I told her not to worry too much, because I am more used to it happening, and I usually just keep my eyes shut to avoid seeing anything creepy. And like I said before, it's easily manageable, and I usually don't see anything anyway. I just want to be sure. Anyway, this experience happened a few days before writing this. It was during the middle of the day, and I was taking a nap in my bed. Usually, when I have sleep paralysis, I can get myself out of it within a few seconds and go back to bed like nothing really happens. Not this time. This time, I woke up and knew I was paralyzed, so I tried to move my arms and legs around to get my body awake, but for some reason, I could not get myself out of it. Like I said, I keep my eyes closed to avoid seeing anything. But this time, after about 2 or 3 minutes of trying to wake myself up, I started to get frustrated, so I decided to open my eyes. To my left is a large window. I live in an apartment complex in the underground level, so the window leads straight to the ground at eye level. Well, outside in broad daylight, I saw what looked to be the same figure I saw as a child. I can't be too sure though. All I know is that this thing was tall and black, and it was walking toward my window. Outside the apartment complex is a line of trees about 40 feet back, and it was at the tree line. As it slowly got closer, I noticed some features on the figure. Its eyes were beet red, and it was smiling wide. Its teeth were poking out of its mouth, and they were razor sharp. I couldn't do anything but watch in terror as this tall, horrifying figure walked toward me. It put me in a state of fear, and I honestly almost started to cry, thinking my life was about to end. Finally, after about 30 seconds of me staring at this figure getting closer to me, I finally managed to wake myself up, and just as soon as it appeared, it was gone. I will never forget the way it was staring at me, menacingly, almost like it was enjoying watching me suffer. It was the summer of 2012 and a dry, hot California day. I was 12 years old and lived in the mountain areas of California with my parents. I didn't have a cell phone yet, so I spent most of my days outside playing in the dirt. This day in particular was the worst. My parents were in a toxic marriage with each other and spent most of their days fighting. This day the fight was so bad that my dad left, and my mom went straight to sleep in an alcohol-induced coma. I was old enough to understand not to get involved and just stay outside, so I did. I was playing in the backyard when I started to hear a woman's cry. At first, I thought it might just be my mother waking up and getting upset again. Her bedroom window was always open and faced the backyard, so in my mind, this felt completely logical. I went back to what I was doing, and about 2 minutes later, I heard the cry again, and this time it had grown louder. I began to feel unsettled as I realized that the sound was coming from in front of me, not behind me. I peeked around the corner and looked down the street to be faced with a horrific image. There was a grown woman walking down the street. She was completely naked and covered in blood. She was crying with the most unsettling cry I had ever heard. I thought to myself, I need to get inside. But because I hesitated, it gave the woman time to notice me, and she began speed walking up to my house. I was frozen with fear as this woman approached me. She was crying and breathing heavily. As she got closer, I realized the blood was actively pouring from her stomach. I ran up my stairs and started screaming for my mom. The woman shouted, "Wait! I don't want to hurt you. Please, I need help." Tears were welling up in my eyes, and I was shaking from fear. I stopped in my tracks at the top of the stairs and said, "Okay, sit on the stairs and I'm gonna go get my mom." The woman responded, "Thank you so much. I have been attacked, and he's still looking for me." Being a dumb 12-year-old, This was somewhat comforting to me, to know that she was a normal woman who had been hurt, but concerning that she may bring an attacker to my house. I went and woke up my mom, who was angry at me for waking her up and telling a lie. She came outside with me anyways, and I watched her face lose color, and she realized there really was a bloody woman on the porch. My mom yelled at me to go grab the woman one of her old t-shirts and to call 911. I brought my mom's t-shirt, and she helped the woman get dressed. I called 911 on the house telephone and frantically explained what had happened. The operator asked me, "Sweetheart, are you there alone?" I responded, "No, my mom is here with me, sitting next to the woman." The 911 operator took a deep breath and said, "This is what I need you to do. I need you to tell your mom the ambulance is on the way, and then tell her to get inside and lock all of your doors until the police and paramedics arrive." I was confused, and I once again explained to the operator that the woman was attacked, and the attacker is out looking for her. The operator then said something that sent chills down my spine. "Sweetheart, she is the attacker. She stabbed her neighbor 37 times. He called first and was picked up about 30 minutes ago. Police have been looking for this woman for months, as this is not the first time she has attacked someone." It was at that moment that I looked outside and noticed that the woman was holding a box cutter in her left hand. I screamed at my mom to get inside now, which caused the woman to jump up and pull the box cutter towards my mom. My mother kicked her and ran inside. The woman banged and kicked at our door for the entire 15 minutes it took the police and ambulance to arrive. When they got there, she stopped and began to cry again. She attempted to tell the police that she had been attacked, but they obviously were not buying it. They put the woman in the ambulance, and the police handcuffed her to the railing of her bed. The sheriff called later that night and explained that the woman's stab wound on her stomach was done by her to make it look like she had truly been attacked. He had also said that this man, the neighbor, was the third victim of hers in the past few months, and that if we had waited any longer, we could have been next. I was given a stern talking to by the sheriff about how dangerous this could have gone, and how I should never talk to strangers. It was hard to focus on him though, because all I could hear in my head was the 911 operator saying, "Sweetheart, she is the attacker." Just to preface, my memory is a little hazy, whether it be from time or from what happened. And for my privacy, let's say my name is Max. I grew up in a medium-sized city in Wisconsin. This story takes place during elementary school. I think it was the 3rd grade. The day started off like any other. I was going through classes, taking notes, and participating every now and again. It was a few hours into the school day when I raised my hand to ask if I may use the restroom. The teacher gave me the go-ahead and told me not to take too long. I exited the class and started walking to the boys' room, specifically the one closer to a set of doors leading to the playground. I knew not many kids use that one unless it's recess, so it should be clear at the moment. I was pretty shy when it came to going to the bathroom with other people in with me. I usually would end up holding it in and just waiting for everyone else to clear out. Luckily, I picked a good time. The bathroom was empty, and so were the stalls, so I went ahead and went about my business. Just as I finish up, I hear the door open. What great timing, I thought to myself. So I clean up, flush, and make my way to the sink to wash up. But I turned to look and see whom had come into the bathroom. I was immediately confused. There was a boy, too old to be a kid, but not old enough to be a teacher,
So I shyly said hello to the tall young man. I can't remember his face well, but I do remember he had dirty blonde hair and blue clouded eyes. He was also really thin, but muscular, and he looked like an older teenager. The stranger simply said, "Hey, kid, how's it going?" in a chipper tone of voice, to which I said, "Good, I'm just about done if you need to go." He shook his head no and looked me up and down. I didn't really pay it any mind and started to get paper towels to dry my hands. All of a sudden, he asked me, "Hey, do you like wrestling?" Which really puzzled me. What a weird topic. And why now? I don't even know you. Those were the first thoughts that came to mind. "Not really, but I haven't seen much," was the only answer I could come up with. He followed up by saying, "Oh, okay, cool. Well, hey, I love wrestling. Seeing those guys on stage, it's so awesome. Oh, hey, can I show you this cool new move that I saw them use last night?" I started getting pretty anxious and sweaty. I didn't really want to stay in the bathroom for him to show me his moves, so I told him I would have to pass and that I didn't want to be late for class. To which he said, "Oh, don't worry. It won't be long. Here, let me show you." He started walking up to me, and it was only then that I realized just how much taller he was. My heart started going a mile a minute, and the next thing I knew, he put his hands around my throat. He started smiling this giant ear-to-ear grin. His breath smelled like cigarettes. I tapped his arm and asked for him to please let me go, with desperation in my voice. He just smiled bigger and began to chuckle to himself as he began lifting me up against the wall, pinning me to it with one hand, still holding me by the throat with the other. I felt my throat tighten and my windpipe close off. My eyes began to water. I was using my hands to cling to his arm, desperately trying to break free as I struggled. And then, like a jolt of lightning, the idea came to me. With all my strength and might, I kicked him as hard as I could right in the balls. I felt his grip loosen for just a second, and then tighten with 2 times more force. It didn't work. He laughed and said, "Good effort," this time sounding a lot meaner. I started getting cold as my sight began to blur, and my consciousness was slipping. I blacked out. The world and noise faded away, and after that I woke up on the bathroom floor. He was gone. So I got up, a bit shaky, still trying to figure out where he was, and I left the boys' room and slowly walked down the hall back to class, peering over my shoulder to check if he was behind me. I got to my class and stood in the frame of my classroom door, looking down at my shoes and the white tile, only to hear my teacher. "Max, didn't I tell you to hurry? It's been 30 minutes. What were you doing in there?" I was stunned. I was alone in that bathroom, knocked out with a stranger, for 30 minutes. I yelled back at my teacher in a raspy, harsh voice. "Well, it's not my fault some guy choked me." She gave me a mean but curious look and told me to go to my seat and sit down, as if she didn't understand me. So I trudged back to my desk and sat. I never told my school what happened, and I told my mom almost 10 years after. The guy never got punished. I don't even think anyone knew he did something. If you want a lesson from this, school bathrooms suck. Back in 2007, when I was 19, I moved to a coastal town in Oregon from Texas. My mom was moving with my younger brother for a job and didn't want to be alone in a new state, so I had decided to move with her. I had moved around a lot by that point in my life already, and I never liked staying in one place for too long. I worked as a pharmacy technician at the time. I switched my license over to Oregon, got a job and rented a studio apartment that was located in the basement of a very large house my landlady had inherited from her parents. She rented out the rooms in the house to boarders. To get to the apartment, you would enter the property from a side gate and follow a walkway down this little slope and around to the back of the house. When you walked through the door, you would end up in the small kitchen that had a window over the sink, overlooking the backyard that was enclosed by an 8-foot-tall privacy fence. And that's where I was when the strange things began, about a month after I had moved in. I was washing up at the sink, in front of the window, after making something to eat one night at around 11 p.m., when my cell phone rang. Noticing it was an unknown caller, I dried my hands off and answered the phone. I said, "Hello?" And on the other end of the line was an odd, garbled voice making incomprehensible noises. It almost sounded like someone trying to speak underwater, but also slightly robotic sounding. Thinking maybe it was a bad connection, I said, "Hello?" again. This time, the weird garbled voice said something I could make out very clearly. "We can see you in the window." Terrified, I hung up the phone, made sure my doors were locked, turned off all the lights, and closed the curtain in the window over the sink, the only window in the basement studio. Then I called my older brother in Texas. We always were and still are extremely close, and I told him what happened. After a bit, we decided it was probably some prank caller that got lucky in guessing that I had just been visible in a window. I mean, not very original, right? There hadn't been any sign that someone was in the backyard. There was an extremely high privacy fence, so it was unlikely they had saw me over it. And this was a brand new Oregon number that I had hardly given out to anyone. I felt a bit better after that, but still didn't sleep very well that night. In the weeks after that call, I settled in more and was feeling more comfortable in my new surroundings. I got closer to some coworkers at my new job at a local pharmacy and made some casual friends. I hadn't gotten any more calls in that time and didn't feel as alone in the town anymore, especially with one of my new friends I met at work, living just 3 streets away. But my feeling of comfort and settling in wouldn't last very long. The unknown caller called again and again. It got to the point of where it happened on a near nightly basis. Most of the time, it was that same garbled underwater voice just babbling nonsense. But sometimes it would say things I could make out, though almost equally incomprehensible. "You think you are better than us because we do drugs? Set it on fire. We are your masters." I was creeped out, but still kept telling myself I was the victim of a random dialer that got their jollies off saying weird stuff to 19-year-old girls, so I carried on with my life. This had gone on for a couple of months when one night, I had gone across the street from my apartment, in front of an old abandoned church, to call my brother in Texas to shoot the breeze. It was late, about 2 a.m., and sound carried up into the house above my apartment. I would frequently have bouts of insomnia, and my brother was usually up, so I would often sit on the steps of the church and smoke when I made late-night phone calls to not disturb anyone in the house. I had been talking to my brother for about 20 minutes when another call beeped in. I checked, and it was an unknown number. So, I told my brother to hang on, and I answered. It was the distorted voice again, telling me they are watching me in front of the church, and asked, "Who are you talking to?" Panicked, I looked all around me. I couldn't see anything.
I switched back to my brother and told him what was happening as I ran towards my apartment. I got inside and locked the door. I stayed on the line with my brother while I searched my apartment, making sure I was alone. I thought about calling the police, and my brother thought I should too. But what could they do? I talked myself into it just being some weird game someone was playing on me, and that I had nothing to worry about. A few weeks went by without any calls, and after a bit, I was sure they had gotten bored with the whole thing. I had been more cautious after the last call, but as time went on without any more calls, I began to feel more confident that it really all was just some harmless, albeit cruel, joke someone was playing on me. So, one night, pretty late, I decided to walk a few blocks up the hill from my house to a 24-hour store to buy some snacks. On my way back from the store, I started to feel the late hour, and I stopped and sat on a bench near the library to take a bit of a rest and sip on one of the drinks I had just bought. Behind me was a street that ran along the side of the library, and my friend's street was just off of it, directly behind the bench. Within moments, a big man appeared. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing heavy work boots, jeans, and a thick Carhartt work jacket, and a black ball cap. He sat next to me on the bench, a bit too close for comfort. I was nervous because it was the extremely early hours of the morning. Someone else just happening to innocently be there didn't seem all that likely to me. At the time, though, I was young. I didn't really know what to do. I was there too, wasn't I? And I wasn't up to anything. I wasn't sure if my discomfort was really all that valid. I didn't want to seem rude because in my mind, in all likelihood, he wasn't a dangerous person. So I sat there until he said, "Hi." I said hi back and scooted away from him as inconspicuously as I could. We sat in silence for a moment, and feeling like I could and should leave without it being too weird or rude, I was about to get up when he said, "Would you like to be my friend?" He had a light accent I couldn't really place. Nonplussed, I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "We could be friends. We could go in the bushes." And he gestured towards this trail that ran behind the library that leads to a park on the other side of the building. It was enclosed on both sides by bushes that ran the whole length. At this point, I was getting really nervous and was trying to decide if I should just run for it and which direction I should go. My friend's street ran behind me, but his house was at the very end of the street, and it was all uphill. I have never been very athletic, so I couldn't decide if that was easier or my apartment, which was downhill. I could go faster, but I didn't want him to know where I lived if he followed me. What he said next made me realize it was a pointless concern. He already knew where I lived. "I missed you. I haven't seen you since the church." This is the guy that had been calling me. As quickly as the realization came to me, I sprung up, dropping my shopping bag. I turned and ran towards my friend's street as fast as I could in flip-flops, with the guy right behind me. Even with the blood pumping in my ears, brought on by my flight and pure terror, I could hear him chasing after me, his heavy work boots hitting the ground. It didn't take long before I felt him try to grab me. In the chase, though, it ended up being more like a shove, right on my left shoulder, and suddenly my feet were tangled up in my flimsy flip-flops, and I was falling forward into the road. I let out an involuntary, blood-curdling scream, which seemed to have scared him, because the next thing I know, I hear his boots running back down the hill and off down the main street. I got up as quickly as I could and ran full force to my friend's house and pounded on his door. I could tell he was startled. It was the middle of the night. I was out of breath, shaking and crying, and later I would notice bloody. I had hit my forehead on the cement when I fell, and it was badly cut. My joggers were ripped. My knees were skinned and bloody. I was so worked up I couldn't get a word out to explain to him why I had shown up on his doorstep at that hour and in the state that I was in. He called the police, and after calming down enough, I told them and my friend what had happened. The phone calls, everything. They drove around to see if they could find the man that fit my description. They never did, and nothing ever came from it. I moved out of my apartment in the following days and stayed with my mom until I eventually moved out of the state a few weeks later. I just couldn't handle being anywhere near where all this happened. I don't think I could have ever felt safe there again. To this day, I have no idea who that man was, let alone how he got my new phone number that I had hardly given out to anyone. One suspicion I always had was that maybe he knew someone I worked with. Our phone numbers were listed on a paper and tacked to the bulletin board in the office. When this theory came to me, I realized the unknown caller always said, "we." Was it him and one of the other people I worked with? Is that why he said "we" when he called me? At one point, I even suspected the friend I had ran to that night of being in on it. Was it just a coincidence that the man approached me so close to his house? I was a mess afterward and had all kinds of suspicions. Either way, I didn't see the man in town again before I left, and I never received another call from him. For 22 years, I have made myself believe this disturbing series of events did not happen to me. I have successfully convinced myself that this was all imagined. Our minds and souls have an amazing ability to protect us from psychological damage. Then I spoke with a friend that I haven't seen in a long time. The same friend I allegedly experienced this event with. He confirmed the whole thing. I'll do my best to accurately present the entire story, as raw as it happened. And apparently, it did happen. This story revolves around a Ouija board. I hate to even type or say those words. I will not and have not touched one since 1997. As previously stated, that was 22 years ago, making me 13 at the time. An age where I believe most of us start to branch out in curiosities. It's no longer just having sleepovers with friends, playing various video game consoles, or getting into high school sports. Girls were starting to become appealing. In my time, professional wrestling was starting to really take off. A group of my friends were diving into horror movies and scary stories. This is something that always appealed to me. Ever since reading Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I was hooked. This series of books came out when I was around 8 years old. They sold them at our scholastic book fair. Looking back, these stories and illustrations were way too intense for 8-year-olds, in my opinion, but I sure did enjoy them. We like being scared. We like to feel something more than the everyday mundane drudge of life. My friend Philly and I enjoyed getting together and watching horror movies and telling urban legends. We started doing this almost weekly, especially during the summer when school was out. Of course, this was pre-internet era, so all we had media-wise was actually renting a movie or physically going to the theater. And since most horror movies were R-rated, we couldn't see them. I'm sure to most millennials or post-millennials, this sounds like a nightmare scarier than any real-life story.
Because we got tired of renting the same movies over and over, we often focused on urban legends, what we call creepypastas today. We might find some books at the library that had them, or we just made our own up. At this time, we wanted to feel some actual terror. I wish we would have just stuck with our stupid, scary stories. I bet every group of friends had one of those Parker Brothers made board games stashed somewhere. The infamous Ouija board. This toy, quote-unquote, is simple. They even used to advertise it. A board with the alphabet, numbers, yes, no, and goodbye. I suppose this was inevitable. Every kid has to learn for themselves that these are not to be played with, literally and metaphorically. Growing up in a God-fearing family, I knew this felt wrong. I felt this board wasn't right. I also could see through the marketing strategy that Parker Brothers were selling these specifically to children, like all board games. But this was different. They wanted kids to play this only, not adults. You played Monopoly and Chutes and Ladders with your parents. You sure didn't play the Ouija with them. I felt this was wrong, but I also didn't know anything. I was 13. My current 35-year-old self has a hard time understanding what happened and why I dove into this, knowing the outcome would not be ideal. "I found it," my buddy Philly said, "under my sister's bed." This was the start of a series of events that would haunt me for quite a while. It, of course, was the board. We made sure no one was home when we pulled it out. There was an air of mischief around this thing. Certainly, we couldn't deal with his sister finding us in her room, and definitely not his mom finding out what we were up to. The board was glossy and new. It looked like we were possibly the first to use it. The device that 2 or more people used to glide over the board, revealing the answers to your questions, was almost ivory. I wanted to research what this was called, but I don't even want to start down the rabbit hole online. If you've noticed, I don't even want to call it by its name, simply referring to it as the board. I'll call the gliding thing the Oracle for this story. We had 2 sessions with the board. The first was incident-free. We asked a few silly questions, what our future held, if we would get married and have kids, stuff like that. Even though I had never played this before, I still knew not to ask questions like what was the name of the person that we were talking to. Maybe we had gotten that from the hours of watching scary movies. The second session was when things got weird. Philly and I were going back and forth with the board, asking some simple questions about our future lives. I remember asking where I would live as an adult, and the board said, Seattle. I lived 2,000 miles away from Seattle at the time, but this is where I felt the aura of the board shifted. It felt like a thunderstorm was brewing, one where the sky turned red. The oracle we used to piece out our answers to our dumb questions had moved slowly before. Now it was jerking, almost moving off the board to the next letter. I can tell you this about this game. It is real, and neither one of us were moving the oracle. My hands weren't even on it at some points. But back to the Seattle question. I was, and still am, a huge baseball fan. I have rooted, unfortunately, for the Detroit Tigers for my entire life. The mid to late 90s was the explosion of Ken Griffey Jr. to Major League Baseball. I loved watching him play. I got his jerseys for a couple Christmases and birthdays. I'm sure most know that Griffey played for the Seattle Mariners. I loved how that nautical S looked on that teal uniform. I started researching the city of Seattle and thought how cool it would be to live there. Do you know where this is going? This board was not plastic and glue to me anymore. There was something controlling it. Something powerful and dark that knew
I had this particular city on my mind at this time. I didn't let on to my buddy what I was feeling. He didn't seem to let on that he was afraid either. So, we kept on. The next segment of questions is a blur to me. All I remember is the Oracle going mostly to no when we asked a question, even if it wasn't a yes or no answer that was required. Then I asked the last question that I would ever ask the Ouija. Don't get your hopes up. It was nothing profound or deep at all. This is what I asked. Would the Detroit Tigers ever win another World Series? The Oracle moved so fast to goodbye, I thought a tiny trail of fire would be on the board. I'll never forget looking at Philly and seeing what I'm sure was the exact same bulging eyes, mouth-open expression that I had on my face. We knew that one of the rules of this game was when the board said goodbye, you put it away immediately. I think we even read that on the instructions. We threw the board into its box, hustled to his sister's room, as fast as 2 Hostess cupcake and Mountain Dew-filled teenagers could. Philly chucked the board under her bed like nothing happened. After a few breathless moments, we finally started to let out tiny little laughs, lighting up into belly laughs as we hit the floor rolling. We were laughing out the nervousness, also kind of feeling dumb at how scared we got. After the madness finally started dying down, we moved on like nothing happened. I should have stated right from the start that it was late at night when we started playing. I would say it was about midnight, as cliche as that is. When the board said goodbye to us, it couldn't have been more than 1 a.m. in the morning. Philly lived in the country. Across the street was a cemetery. I know, now I'm really hitting cliche territory, but I swear it's true. There weren't many houses around. If you wanted to walk to your next door neighbor, you better plan for a good 20-minute hike. Finally, all mania was shed, and tired from playing video games, we decided to step outside. We looked at the graveyard, noting how calm the night was. Philly had a large section of his yard covered with rose bushes. They were pretty wild and were not kept up. Needless to say, nothing would be able to get into those bushes and not get completely diced. We heard rustling. Again, the night was calm, and I don't remember any wind at all. At first, we could just hear the bushes. Then, movement. To this day, I do not know and don't care to know what it was. It could have been a small animal, but I highly doubt it. We knew something wasn't right and bolted for his house. Even writing this, I can feel an eerie presence. We both knew this was related to the board. Philly suggested we make it a night and try to get some sleep. I wish that was the end of this story. A few short hours later, we were woken up to a series of faint knocking noises. I could not determine what they were coming from, but it sounded like it was somewhere outside his house. We both cautiously got up and moved to the kitchen, where his front door was, and saw something that made my heart drop into my stomach. A man, slight build, wearing all denim, was standing right outside the door. The man also had creepy-looking horn-rimmed glasses on, outdated even for the late 90s. Philly had a porch in the front that was raised about 5 steps from the ground, and the man was on the ground. So when we saw him, we were actually looking slightly down at him, seeing him from the top of his head down. It is an image that is burned into my mind. He didn't move. He just stood there. We once again fled to his room and shut the door. We didn't call the police or his mom. We just sat in his room, not sure what to do. After a few moments, we stupidly decided to see if he was still there. He was gone. I successfully convinced myself that there was no man on the side of the house. I just couldn't handle what was happening on this night. Philly did the same.
Finally, day broke, and we dismissed the disturbing events of the previous night. I don't even think we discussed what happened. About a week later, I got a call from Philly. He said he had a dream that we were playing the board, and a hand came out and attempted to pull his head down. He awoke sweating and in a small amount of pain from where the force had grabbed him. I hated to say that I had a similar dream. Right there, we decided to meet up and do something about this board. My mom dropped me off at his house a few days later to sleep over for the night. When I arrived, I could not find him in his house. This was before cell phones, so I did not have the option to simply call him and see where he was. I checked out back where his garage was. There stood Philly, with the board sitting atop a pile of kindling in a burning barrel. His mischievous grin told me what his plan was. We lit that sucker on fire. Nothing happened. Now, I was really freaking out. We have all heard the stories of people attempting to burn a Ouija with no success. Philly wasn't fazed, though. We pulled out a jerry can full of gasoline and doused it. The board lit up and quickly evaporated into nothing. It was over. As far as I can remember, nothing happened after that. We didn't speak of anything we experienced that night. Over the years, I chalked it all up to an overactive teenage imagination. I may have told a handful of people over the years, mainly just to tell a scary story. I know I've said this a few times, but I have completely treated this like it never happened. This, to me, was all imagined. We did play the game, but the rustling bush, the man, none of that happened. Over the years, I moved quite a distance away from Philly. We kept in touch a few times a year, even making the almost 1,000-mile drive to see him about 10 years ago. Fast forward 10 more years, and I decided to make the trip one last time to see my hometown and get together with Philly. He invited some people from the area and struck up a massive bonfire. In between bites of pizza and swigs of beer, I recounted the story of that night. I told him how I imagined the aftermath of our decision to use that board. I know you're going to think this is crazy, but I thought there was a man standing outside your house that night, I said. Philly looked at me as stone cold as he could and said, "Yeah, I remember that." My blood never went colder. My friend confirmed exactly what happened that night. It was like we were both there again, 22 years ago. I repressed that Ouija board so hard, I made myself believe it never happened. The Ouija is nothing to be played with. I haven't touched or looked at one in over 2 decades. How a piece of cardboard can summon some kind of evil from another realm is beyond me. I just know you don't want to open it. Last year, my family and I were driving back from my grandparents' house over 7 hours away. It had been a long trip as traffic had been bad, and we had to make frequent stops for food and let our family dog out to go to the bathroom. Finally, we were on the freeway closest to my house, and the trip was almost over. My mom, brother, and I were all so relieved to almost be home. My dad had been on a business trip and unable to join us, which sucked, but ultimately left a little more legroom in the packed car. Everything was smooth sailing with my brother and I in La La Land, watching YouTube or playing games and keeping my mom awake. Suddenly, the cars in front of us began to slow down and come to a stop. We naturally followed suit, slowing down and keeping an eye out for what traffic or accident was up ahead. We saw some cars begin to swerve and drive away down another lane, fast. Odd, we thought, but nothing to be worried about. That's when I realized of the 2 lanes on our side of the road,
Only the one closest to the median was stopped. We weren't sure exactly what happened, so we stayed in the stopped lane. That's when my mom suddenly locked all the doors to the car. I looked at her confused and wondering what she saw. My brother in the back seat had begun looking around confused and worried. I realized my mom must have seen something further up the road than I could see. I asked what was going on, but my mom didn't need to answer. The car in front began to try to pull away but wasn't able to. That's when I saw him. A random man in the middle of the freeway banging and trying to open people's doors to their cars. My eyes were fixated on the man, and my heart began to race. My mom began to make the move to get out of there, but it was too late. The man ran from the car in front of us to my mom's door. He looked scruffy and disheveled. He began slamming on my mom's window, begging for us to let him in. My mom began yelling at the man to go away through the closed windows as she tried to pull away. My brother and I were frozen in fear, unaware what this man wanted to do to us. My mom managed to pull away a few feet before the man then jumped onto the hood of our car and began slamming his fists into the windshield. My mom screamed, and I just sat there horrified. I had never felt this type of fear before. We all like to think that when fight or flight kicks in, that we'll be the hero. But I sat there helpless as this man threatened my family. The man demanded incoherently that we drive with him on our hood. My mom then saw multiple cop cars pull up behind us, with 2 officers running up to apprehend the man. He jumped from our hood and hopped the 5-foot median. We saw the police draw their weapons and subdue him on the other side of the median, as my mom slammed on the gas and sped away. We were in shock, and I couldn't believe what had just happened. I listened to Being Scared, Let's Read, and other true scary stories, and never thought I would be face to face with a situation straight from a nightmare. It was only several miles later that my mom felt safe enough to pull off to the side of the road and called my dad, and then the police to report what happened. The officers were incredibly kind and told us that the man was in police custody and asked if we were okay. My dad, however, was panicked. Everything he loved was in that car, he told us, and he was so glad that we were safe. That's when we realized, had this man had a weapon, he most likely would have tried to use it. I began to tear up, realizing that we may have narrowly escaped a crazed man with our lives. My mom got a call the next day from the officer that had ran up from behind us and stopped the man. We were so incredibly grateful. My respect for law enforcement has always been strong, and without them, I don't know what we would have done, or if I would be here to tell this story. Thanks for listening, and of course our dog was fine, sleeping peacefully the entire time. I would like to start by saying that all the names in this story have been changed. Last year in 2021, I was living in a townhouse in New Mexico with my twin sister. We'll call her Carrie, and our 2 childhood best friends, Robbie and Izzy. The time in that house was full of your typical young adult ups and downs, but amplified by the turmoil of the pandemic. That house was full of good, bad, and ugly times, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. However, the last few months were absolutely terrible before I ended up leaving the state. Let me start with a little backstory. Carrie had been in a relationship with a man who we will call Jay. Jay and Carrie had a very unhealthy relationship, which ended with him being kicked out of our house after an altercation between him and Carrie. Police were called, and we thought that would be the end of it. Let's just say he didn't take being thrown out of the house and dumped too well. One day, on the off chance that I had a day off from work, I was in the kitchen most of the day doing some deep cleaning and self-care. While I was able to do the first part with ease, I could not for the life of me shake the feeling of being watched. I have struggled with anxiety symptoms due to PTSD, so I wrote this off as me just having a bad day. That was until Robbie came home, throwing the door open and shouting, "Tell me why I saw Jay circling our block." I was in shock. I ran to the window looking over our street, and sure enough, Jay's car was speeding off. We told Carrie about it as soon as she got home from work that day, and she then revealed to myself, Robbie, and Izzy that Jay had been stalking her. I was not surprised given the details of this situation, as Carrie then told us about this next situation, which shook me to my core. One night, I want to say this story was about 2 weeks prior to him circling the block, Jay had been watching Carrie from afar while she went out with friends. Carrie must have forgot to lock the door when she came home. She says she woke up from a deep sleep and could have sworn that she saw someone standing over her bed. She said she didn't want to tell us right away because she had first assumed that she was dreaming or even having an episode of sleep paralysis. She would later receive a message from Jay scolding her for not talking to him when he came to the house the other night. That other night in question being the same night Carrie had come home. I started locking the doors even when everyone was home after Carrie told me that story. He was in the house while we were all sleeping sound in our beds, unaware that someone who we all didn't want anywhere near us was just sulking in the corner of my sister's bedroom. Watching over her, he could have done anything, but he chose to just watch her. That was deeply unsettling for all of us. Now, I had already made the decision that once my lease was over, I was going to be moving in with my partner in a different state. At this point, we had all been packing up our things and preparing to move, go our separate ways. For more context, the landlord had installed a security system. Nothing high-tech by any means, but anytime a door or window was open, the alarm would say in a robotic monotone voice, "Side door open," or "Back office window closed." Things like that. One night, I was home alone. Carrie was at dinner with Robbie and Robbie's mom, and I had no idea where Izzy was until this series of events happened. I was in my bedroom when suddenly I heard what sounded like tapping on my window. I figured it was the branches tapping like they usually did when there was even a small gust of wind, but the tapping was constant, timed almost. I still shrugged it off again, trying not to make myself anxious while I was alone in the house. It was then that I heard the security system go off. Back sliding door open. From the other room. Weird. We all usually come in through this side door when the kitchen and living room meet, as our front door was next to impossible to open from the outside. I brushed it off, thinking maybe Carrie and Robbie had forgotten their keys and just came in through the back door. I called out from my bedroom. "Carrie? Robbie? How was dinner?" No response. As soon as the words left my mouth, the silence was deafening. I walked out to the hallways where all of the bedrooms led and called out again. "Carrie? Robbie? Izzy?" Again, nothing. I'm getting a bit freaked out now, but I'm thinking that they maybe didn't hear me. But that silence. I will never in my life forget the silence that rang through that house as I inched closer to the living room. As I am finally standing in the living room, the only sounds I had heard in the span of a few minutes was my own heart beating out of my chest, my footsteps, and the AC kicking on. I finally reached the living room, and I had checked Find My Friends. To my horror, Carrie and Robbie were still at the restaurant with Robbie's mom. Izzy's phone had broken during this time too, so I had no clue where she was still. Knowing what I know at that moment, I called out one last time, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the corner and go into the kitchen. Izzy? Are you home? Silence again. I figured maybe I was just hearing things at that point. Then I heard it. Ugh. Came a hushed whisper from the kitchen, followed by the most hurried footsteps behind me, going out the back door. I froze. Who was that? It all made sense at that point. The tapping on the window, the door opening with no noise from whoever opened it, and now this. I knew at that moment that I was not alone. Something came over me, and I snapped out of this frozen reaction. "You better get out of my house!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I grabbed the baseball bat that I kept in the hall closet and started shouting that same sentence in 10 different ways, opening all the doors and switching on all the lights, making sure that whoever this was had left. I finally made it to the kitchen and found out the sliding glass door was left wide open by whoever came into it. As soon as the adrenaline had worn off, the shock then set in. I booked it out of the house, locking the doors before throwing open my car door and ripping out the driveway without putting on my seatbelt. I called all my roommates, whose phones still worked. I later found out that Izzy had actually left town for the weekend, and I had missed that conversation. So I know whoever was in the house was not my sister or either of my other 2 roommates. Robbie called the police as soon as we got off the phone. Of course, there wasn't much they could do because nothing was stolen, and I didn't see who was in my home uninvited. I drove to my coworker's house, and I broke down telling her what happened, and I waited for her to update me on what she and Carrie were going to do. They opted to stay at the hotel with Robbie's mom that night. I don't know who it was that broke into my house that night. Was it Jay? Some drunk college kid who stumbled into our yard thinking it was their place? Someone with more sinister intentions who got caught at the right time? I am not sure. I think that is what keeps me up sometimes when I think too deeply about that night. I know it wasn't an anxiety-induced thing. I saw the door, and I heard the whisper at the footsteps hurrying out the same door they came in. I am just happy that I live with my partner in a different state now, in a relatively safe neighborhood. But even that, some nights, is not enough to allow me to feel safe when I am home alone.
I work for a special unit with the Sheriff's Department. The official designation is the Electronic Monitoring Unit. We install, monitor, and enforce all rules and policies designated when given a GPS tether. I am sure when I say ankle monitor, most people will understand that a little clearer. Most of the time is spent tracking people, making sure they are within their court-ordered curfew, etc. Like all police work, nothing is routine, but it's not exactly all PD Live or whatever true cop show you can think of. I have been on some exciting calls working in Tether. When someone attempts to cut one of these bad boys off, we get an alert immediately. The rush to get the person before they get the tether off is intense. It's even more intense when they do remove it and you find some later. Manhunting is the most exciting. I'm sure you've all read The Most Dangerous Game. I have been on some strange calls too. Every police officer has 1 or 2 stories bordering on paranormal. Back in my early days working the jail, I used to hear noises during midnight shift when I was ordered over to work, and not inmate noises. Those I was used to. I mean banging sounds coming from the hallway closets where linen and toilet paper is kept. Once I passed a door and heard what I thought was a weapon going off inside. I probably had to change my uniform after that. It was really like someone kicking the door from the inside as hard as they could. It took a minute, but I did check inside, to find nothing, of course. Back in 1993, our department lost a sergeant in the line of duty. He was making normal security rounds in one of the old jails downtown when an inmate took him hostage with a weapon. You can imagine how terrifying this would be for anyone, but you are not supposed to face anyone with a weapon inside of the jail. It is still not known how that weapon came into the jail. Most think the inmate somehow got it fished to him from the outside, or it was an officer that brought the weapon in for the inmate. That is a possibility that I hate to consider. One day I was working that jail, doing normal security rounds. I remember seeing a shadow walking down the long concrete hallway. I did not think much of it at the time until I remembered that the hallway didn't have any outlets, left or right, meaning that I saw this man walking down the hall. I looked down, and when I looked back, he was gone. I went to look for him, and he was nowhere to be found. It took me a while to put the pieces together. I asked my partner what floor had the sergeant been killed on. The one we are on right now, is what he said. The jail is one thing, but having some creepy stuff happen out in the outside world is another. I go through a lot of houses in my job. You could not believe how people live out here. Think about how you were raised and look around your home. It is not the same where I work. I will not say where, but it is a major U.S. city with major U.S. problems. Poor problems, racial problems, and awful sports teams to boot. Let me set up this call for you. My partner and I are in the office, monitoring and maintaining our population on Tether, which is well into the 1000s. We have more people on GPS than in all of our jails combined. My partner gets an alert that someone on his caseload has a low battery. These devices are solid. The battery life lasts about 3 to 4 days if you charge it for 2 hours. Compared to our cell phones, that seems reasonable, but you just can't get some of these people to follow the rules, which is why they are in this situation in the first place. My partner goes through the process of trying to get his guy to start charging. Calling will not work. Can't get a hold of any of his friends or family either. The last resort is calling the actual device on his leg. The company we use that develops the GPS tethers has a monitoring center, open 24 hours. We can call them and be patched through to the device. Finally, we get a hold of him. "Just charge your tether, man," my partner yells into the phone. It's hard to hear the subject's response, but it sounds like he acknowledges it. He is staying at a friend's house right now in the southwest part of the city, which of course we can see. He of course lost his charge cord for the device. My partner decides, since we are pretty close to him, why don't we just run another out to him? Sounds like a plan, I think, and start getting my gear on. There was nothing strange about the house when we pulled up. Normal looking 2-story corner house with crap all over the overgrown yard, and several cars in various states of decay. I checked an app on my county-issued cell phone that shows me where the GPS points are on anyone that wears one. I just wanted to make sure it was still communicating, and that he's still at this house. It looked like a yes for both. My partner gets to the door, knocks, and asks for Mike. I'm at the side of the house watching the side door, but also keeping my eyes on my partner. I hear a female voice call for Mike. Another male voice is speaking to my partner too. At this point, since contact was made and I didn't feel like anyone's going to burst out the side or back of the house, I make my way back up to my partner. I now identify the two people he's speaking with. The male is maybe in his early 20s, the female about the same. Both are what you would call in rough shape. Had something of a zombie vibe to them. Strung out, if you get me. As I'm walking up, I can also surmise that the guy is telling my partner something to the effect that the guy known as Mike
is not in fact at his home. My partner calmly tells him that we know he's here. We just saw his last tracking point, which puts him right on top of us. Literally, so to speak. I believe he was upstairs. If he's not here, why did the female call for him? Again, we are just here to give him a charge cord. No one was in trouble. This kid starts to get shifty. Here go the eyes peeking around, the rubbing of the hands, and the flat-out lies. Look, he was here maybe 10 minutes ago, but he ain't here now. I don't let dopers in my home. Okay, bullcrap aside, we still have to figure this out. I want to go back to our vehicle, look at the tracking, see what's going on. It is possible that we could have just missed him. The tether calls out a location every 5 minutes. It's not live tracking. He may have just left when we pulled up. However unlikely, it was possible. All I had to do was wait for his next point. Ding. The point is in. Let's see where this low charger is. Well, he is still at the house. Again, we go to the front. And again, the kid says he's not here, that he just left. I look at my phone, now getting more frustrated. What the... I say out loud. Now there is a strap tamper alert from Mike. This means that our guy may have started to cut the tether off. I'm confused at how all of this had gone. My partner starts grilling the kid again. Look, cut the crap. Where is he? Still, the kid gives nothing up. I look around the area. Maybe this idiot did cut it off and throw it around the porch, and the alert just came in too late. I don't see anything though, and I would have heard the alarm if he did cut it off. It's louder than some ambulance sirens. Something feels strange about this whole thing. The kid invites us in to look around, and we take him up on his offer. Nothing better than a consent to search a home. Once we get in, I'm immediately taken back by the piss and cat feces smell of the home. There's literal trash in all rooms, like the doors can't even close because they are blocked by trash. This is going to be a nightmare to search through. I can tell you right now, I didn't go through any of those trash rooms. My partner and I cleared the bottom floor as best we could and started moving upstairs. This is where things get eerie. The staircase twisted. Odd for this type of home in this area. Like I said, I go through a lot of houses. It's just something you don't see that often. Once we reach the top, we are all of a sudden in the Stanley Hotel. In Stephen King's The Shining, it was known as the Overlook Hotel. The hallway stretched for an impossible length. The carpet was red with yellow triangles. I don't think there was carpet downstairs anywhere. The hairs are starting to stand up now. A feeling of unease is thick as the hallway juts in and out. There's a room every 5 feet or so, and there must have been 6 to 7 rooms up there. That is just not possible for a house like that, and every single door was padlocked from the outside. I was beyond done trying to make anything add up with this situation. I told my partner to hold the downstairs so no one came up behind us. Since the doors were locked, I was not bothering with them. Once I got to the end of the hall, I gave up and turned around. I called my partner back to game plan. I think we are about done, I said. I don't know what's going on with this guy's device. Maybe he cut it and smashed it. Either way, I think we needed to get out of that house as soon as possible. As we are heading for the winding stairs, we both hear a low thump. We look at each other with that, "Did you hear that?" facial expression. While we both stand still, I hear scratching noises, followed with another thumping. I don't believe either of us could tell which direction it was coming from. Weird, but could be anything at this point. I am still leaving. And as I'm passing a door, my heart stops. First, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. Slowly turning to my left, I'm looking directly into someone's eyeball, peering between the slightly opened door. 10 dirty fingers start poking out, trying to open the door. Imagine the lead character from the movie I mentioned earlier. Here's Mikey. This guy did not look like the person we were looking for. Who are you? I asked, embarrassed I couldn't tone down how shocked I was. That's him, my partner said. Once I snapped back to reality, I didn't think, just acted. I blasted that door Spartan style, sending our pal Mike across the room. After being taken into custody, we questioned him, and he said he got scared when he heard police were at the door. He hid and stupidly tried to cut the device off his leg. Pretty simple and thankfully safe outcome. After having some choice words with the kid we first dealt with, we brought our guy to jail, and that was that. But I'll never forget seeing that hallway for the first time. All those strange padlocked doors, and the eyeball staring at me from the darkness.